And we're going to talk about volcanoes because the Hawaiian Islands are volcanoes. We're going to learn a little bit about how these islands formed. We're going to talk a little bit about how life arrived on these planets on these islands, because these islands are just coming out of nowhere, right? They're not like continents that are banging into each other. This is brand new Earth that's coming up, and how do these islands get populated with land? Remember, everything is connected. Every natural thing on the planet is recycled, even the Earth that we walk on as well. Now, to understand how these islands form, we've got to go back to elementary school or middle school and learn just a little bit about how the Earth is formed. We have a molten core, and the inner core, and then we have this mantle and we have this crust. The molten core is mostly iron and nickel. And then we have this mantle that is just a mix of all of these different elements. And it's fluid in the sense that it's kind of like toffee, saltwater toffee that's just a little bit viscous, and it can stretch and bend. And this mantle is this moving mass that is underneath this crust that we have. Now, you can think of this like a hard-boiled egg. You've got a hard-boiled egg, you've got the yellow yolk in the center, that would be the core, and then you've got that white part of it, that would be the mantle, and then you've got that outer shell. And if you hard-boil that egg and you drop the egg, what happens to the shell? It cracks. And you have all these different cracks that are in that outer shell. Unlike the egg, where the shell is all uniform, the Earth has two different kinds of shell, or two different kinds of crust. One is continental crust, and the other is oceanic crust. Continental crust is thick. Oceanic crust is thinner. But even though the oceanic crust is thinner, it's more dense than the continental crust. And this outer crust on the Earth is moving, and it's being moved by the material that makes up the mantle. And when these plates crash together, they can interact in different ways. But remember, the oceanic crust is more dense than the continental crust. So if these two crusts crash into each other, which one's going down? It's going to be the thicker, the more dense, the heavier crust. And that's going to be the oceanic crust because it's heavier. So it's going to go underneath that continental crust. So just keep that in mind. Now, we can look at this, and we didn't really have a good understanding of plate tectonics. How many people have heard of plate tectonics? Okay, these are plates that are floating on that viscous material, that mantle. And we didn't have a good understanding of that, or we didn't begin understanding that until the 1980s. How long ago was that? 40 years ago. That's hardly been any time that we've been studying this plate movement and how these plates are moving around. But these are the plate boundaries that we have. And can you see the plate that we're on? We're on that Pacific plate. And do you see the Hawaiian Islands right there in the middle?
Yeah.
And of course, just like the ocean, that's the biggest. This is also the biggest plate on the planet, and this is the Pacific plate, and this is where we have been traveling, and they're the Hawaiian Islands right there in the middle. And where you see those red lines, those are called plate boundaries, and this is where two plates come together. And we did talk a little bit about plates when we talked about the Marianas Trench. We were talking about the Philippine plate that sits right there, right around there, and the Marianas Plate. But right now we're going to be talking about this Pacific Plate and the role that it has played in creating the Hawaiian Islands. And when we're up in Alaska, we talk about this as well, but we're talking about how it pertains to that particular boundary that's up in Alaska. Now we've got three different types of boundaries, and these are those red lines that you just saw. Sometimes these plates are moving away from each other, and we call that divergent, of course, plate boundary. And this is where they're moving away. These are mid-Atlantic ridges, mid-Pacific ridges. These are ridges where the Earth is opening up, and when it does, it releases that magma underneath it to come up, and this is where new Earth is formed. And then we have other boundaries that are called convergent boundaries. And this is where two plates are crashing into each other. And when this happens, when it's oceanic crust and continental crust, that oceanic crust is going to dive underneath that continental crust. And this is where we see earthquakes, it's where we see volcanoes, and it's where we see mountains. It's why the Himalaya mountains, for instance, are there. It's because you've got two plates that are crashing into each other, and it's jammed up all those mountains. It's why up on the Pacific Northwest, it's why we have volcanoes and we have mountains up in that Mount Rainier. We've got Mount Baker, Mount Rainier, all those volcanoes that are up there, and it's also why all those Aleutian Islands up there are also volcanic. And then we have another kind of boundary. It's called a transform boundary. And this is where two plates are coming together, but instead of one going up over the other or the spreading, this is where they're sliding past each other. And the most famous one in the world is which one? That's right, it's San Andreas Fault. LA is going to be where San Francisco is in about 20 million years. Long time. But those two plates, and if you live in Los Angeles, if you live in Santa Barbara, San Diego, any of those towns that are in the coast there south of San Francisco, you do not live on the same plate as everybody else does. You are living on the Pacific plate because you're on the other side of this fault. And then anyone who lives on the other side, the continental part of that, you're on the North American plate. So those few people that live in that little area there are living on the Pacific plate. And you can see it right here. If you live to the left of that red line, you're living on the Pacific plate. If you live on the right, you're living on the North American plate. And that's called a transform plate boundary. Now, all of these plates are moving around here, and they all have different directions that they're moving. And you can see that Pacific plate is moving in a northwest direction. And what's moving it is that, as we said, is this magma. Now, here's how this works. Everybody's seen a hot air balloon. If you heat up the air in that balloon, which direction does that balloon move? It moves up. And as it moves up, as it cools down, which way does it move?
No.
This is called convection. And this is what drives all of the major wind currents around our planet. And where on our planet do you think the air is going to be the warmest? You were just there. The equator is where this air heats up. And the air moves either to the North Pole or the South Pole. And when it does, what happens to it? It cools down. So at the equator, it heats up. Which direction does it move?
Up.
Up. It goes to the North Pole or the South Pole. It cools off. Which way does it go? It goes down. This is what drives all of the major wind patterns, wind currents we're experiencing right now. These are the trades that are blowing through here. We're in the trade latitudes, and you can feel those. These are the same winds that are blowing across Hawaii right now. Now think about water. If you heat up water, which direction does it move?
Up.
Same thing. It moves up. You boil water, and you've seen that water coming up. Steam, in the form of steam, right? That water moves up. And then if you cool that water off again, which way does the water move?
Down.
It moves down. Where on our planet do you think the water heats up the most? Same place. The equator, which is where we are, right between these latitudes, 22 north, 22 south, right in this area. This is where the water heats up. And if the ocean water heats up, which direction does it move? It moves up. And then it spreads out. It goes to the North Pole or the South Pole, depending on which side of the equator is on. And as it goes to those poles, what do you think it does? Does it heat up or cool off? It cools off, and then it sinks. This is the principle of convection. This is what drives all of the major currents on our planet. Is this moving, this heating up of the water, and then this water cooling. It's what drives all of these currents. Now, on our planet here, the hottest part is going to be at the core. This is the hottest part of our planet. So right at the core, it's heating up that magma. And as it heats up that magma, which direction does it move?
Up.
It moves up. And as it gets closer and closer to the crust, which direction does it? It cools off. And which direction does it move?
Down.
It moves back down. This is what drives all of the motion of our plates as well. It's this principle of convection. It's what drives all of the major forces on our planet, and it's moving these plates around. So this mantle is heating up, cooling off, it's moving around, and as it does, it's moving these plates around as well. Sometimes it comes up, you can see that rising mantle in a mid-Atlantic ridge. This is the divergent plate boundary. Sometimes you've got that oceanic crust pushing underneath that continental crust, and as it does, it can create volcanoes, mountains, and so forth. Here's a picture of this whole boundary of the Pacific Plate, and if you look at that, it also has a name to it. Does anybody know the name of that boundary? By the way, yes, it's called the Ring of Fire. And the reason is because all through, it even says it right there. Okay, good, yeah. I still believe you knew it. You didn't have to look at it. All right, so it's called this Ring of Fire. I forgot it was written there. And you can see these little areas here, these little kind of grayish colored lines. And those are areas where subduction is taking place. Now, on these plates, you can have all three types of boundaries that are taking place on this, depending on how this plate is moving. For example, here's California right here. That's a transform boundary, and these here are convergent boundaries, and that plate is slipping underneath that. Has anybody been to Chile, Peru, Ecuador?
Yes.
What do you find? What kind of mountains do you find there? Volcanoes. I mean, you find a lot, but you find volcanoes here, all through here, and then anybody been to Costa Rica, Guatemala? What do you have there? Volcanoes again. That's because it's a subduction boundary. And then we come up here, there's another one that's up here. All these Aleutian Islands goes all the way around. Those are all volcanic areas because those are subduction zones there. All right, here's another map of this. These are earthquakes. There are also earthquakes that take place where these boundaries are. And if you look at those, here's a compilation of earthquakes over the last 100 years. And if you look at that, can you see that ring of fire?
Yeah.
Easily, huh? You can easily see that. And you can see a few other plate boundaries that are there as well. And this is the plate boundary that we sailed over not too long ago. That's where the Marianas Trench is. And then you got this one crazy thing. And it sits right there in the smack dab in the middle of the Pacific Plate. And these are earthquakes, right? That we're looking at here.
No.
What is that?
Is that Hawaii?
That is Hawaii,
Yeah.
and it doesn't fit anything that I just told you about. Plate boundaries and so forth. It's an exception, and now we got to find out what is the exception, because this exception is what has formed all of these islands here. So here's what's happened. We have, this is a little out of focus, but you can still see, we have what's called a hot spot, smack dab in the middle of the Pacific Plate. And what happens every now and then is that this hot spot will find a weak place in the crust, and it will poke through with that magma that we were just talking about. And it'll spurt up that magma, and that magma will create an island. And this plate, because as we just said, convection is moving this plate in a northwest direction, this plate just is moving over this hot spot like this, and every now and then it'll poke up an island as this plate is moving. And this is how scientists know which direction the Pacific Plate is moving as well. And this is how all of these islands were formed. And you can think of Kauai around 5 million years ago. And of course you would expect the next island to be a little bit younger. This is going to be the oldest island because this was the very first one that was formed. And then this plate continues to move. So Oahu continues, Maui, and then you've got the big island of Hawaii over here, which is the newest island. And what's going on the newest island right now is it is sitting right over that hot spot. And because of that, that volcano on the island is erupting even today. It is erupting, as you will see.
Oh.
Okay? This is what it looks like. There's Kilauea. Mauna Loa is also erupting as well. It's right next to Kilauea. There's our hot spot, and you can see how it's coming down. It's at about 60 miles below the crust. It's like a volcano conveyor belt here. And you look at that, and it just continues. And here's the Aleutian Trench over here I think in this next photo I'm going to show you something kind of interesting. Here are the islands, the 8 islands. When we think about Hawaii, there are 2 additional ones that are out there as well. But Kauai is the oldest, and then the newest, of course, is Hawaii. Now take a look at this. It turns out the Hawaiian chain consists of more than just the islands that we can see. These islands, there are over 130 of them that extend all the way out, because for the last 65 million years this plate has been moving. And take a look at this. This is called the Emperor Chain. All of these islands that we see in this chain came from that same hot spot. And it's very interesting because this means that the plate changed direction, took a hard right-hand turn, and technically you could say that the Hawaiian Islands actually connect to the Aleutian Islands. And these are underwater seamounts. Every now and then there are a couple that still have not eroded to the point that they're below sea level. For example, Midway Island, it still sits, it's an atoll that just, and there are a couple of others that are out there that just sit and they're almost gone. Those islands are almost gone, but these are all underwater seamounts that extend here, and they all have originated from the same place that those 8 islands in Hawaii that interest us are. And you can see another one here. You can see these seamounts that extend, and these seamounts, when these islands grow, they're going to erode, but also they're going to have coral that is going to continue to grow around them. And we'll talk about this tomorrow, how these coral atolls are formed. But they're going to continue to form around them. But as the plate pushes those islands up, even though they may get completely eroded and forming an atoll, the coral is going to build upon, and keep building up until the plate moves that landmass north of this latitude right here, which is about at 30 degrees. 29, 30 degrees, right around there. And once it pushes above that island, above that, the coral can no longer grow, and now that landmass will have no way of growing, and it's just going to continue to erode underwater and subside and subside. But these are all seamounts that extend all the way up to the Aleutian Islands that were formed from that very same hotspot that created the Hawaiian Islands that we're familiar with. Now these seamounts are so significant that we've created a national monument around those. Clinton created this reserve. Bush expanded that reserve during his presidency to 140,000 square miles, and Obama continued to expand upon that, and now it's over 500,000 square miles of area here, and that is the, anybody want to try to pronounce that? Papa Hanau Moku Waikea, because the E is always pronounced as an A, right? Waikea Marine National Monument. And that is a Hawaiian name for the 2 spiritual entities or gods, the mother and the father of Earth there. And there's a whole story around that. This is what we're doing in that national monument. We're doing tons of research. We've discovered new life forms, we've cut new life systems, new ecosystems out here as well, and a lot of scientific exploration, and not a whole lot of recreational diving. It's a little bit far out, but probably start to see some of that as well, and studying those resources. All right, on we go. Diamond Head. And is anybody going to climb Diamond Head, by the way? Nobody? You
Why
have,
not?
but nobody's planning it. I might do it. Are you gonna? All right, good, ambitious. Diamond Head is an extinct volcano. Why? Now you know, right? Is Diamond Head gonna erupt? No, because it's not over the hot spot, right? We've got that little hot spot right there. It's long past it. That's an extinct volcano. And here's Haleakala. This is on Maui. Since we're talking about volcanoes, I'm going to go ahead and talk about some of the volcanoes on the other islands here as well. And this is a dormant volcano. It sits on Maui. It is 10,000 feet tall. How many people have been there, by the way? If you haven't been there, it's really a spectacular place. You could put the entire city of Manhattan in the center of this crater.
Wow.
It is that big. It makes up 70% of the island of Maui. And it's just really, really fascinating. There, Haleakala, it's the world's largest dormant volcano, last erupting 1790. When was Captain Cook there? He was there before. Yeah, so this erupted after. 8 years, oh, I just said it, 8 years before. 8 years before Cook landed. It forms more than 75%, 7,000 feet deep, 7 miles long, and it can hold Manhattan. Hawaii Volcanoes National Park. This is on the Big Island, and this is another national park dedicated to volcanoes. Talk about that in a little bit. This is Kilauea. It's one of the world's most active volcanoes. And it is the home of Pele. Do you remember who Pele is?
Yes.
Yeah, Pele is the god
of fire.
Fire, the god of creation. That's her job. And if we look at the Big Island of Hawaii, we can see that it is made up of 5 different volcanoes. And where the active volcanoes are right here, it's Mauna Loa and Kilauea. These 2 volcanoes are still active, and Kilauea is currently erupting here. All of these volcanoes are either going to be extinct or dormant, except for those 2, Mauna Loa and Kilauea. And I think I've got these here. Yeah, and there's the active. Kohala up here at the very north. This is the oldest volcano, and that has not erupted for a long time. That's considered extinct. And Mauna Kea, this is the one that's got the telescopes on top of it. This one is dormant, and then these 2 right here are active. And you could say Hualale is also dormant. Here is another view of the Big Island of Hawaii, and you can see the 2 volcanoes that are sitting there. Those volcanoes are 14,000 feet, by the way. Mount Whitney, the tallest point in the lower 48, that's at 14,000, basically 14,500. So these mountains are almost as tall as the tallest peak in the lower 48. You can see them right there. And then I've got this little star that's sitting there in the lower right. And notice that that's kind of close to these active volcanoes. And this is little Loihi. And Loihi is still an underwater seamount, but it's a volcano that is erupting underwater, and it is slowly growing and growing. And just you saw the Big Island of Hawaii is made up of 5 volcanoes. It remains to be seen what's going to happen with little Loihi. And that could either join the Big Island, become the sixth volcano on the Big Island of Hawaii, or it might become another little island. We don't know what's going to happen with this yet. And that's what it looks like. I think it's about 7,000 feet underwater, and you can see that venting. Now I'm going to show, in a couple of slides, I'm going to show you another picture. But the reason these volcanoes are slow growing underwater is because we already studied this a little bit. As you go deeper, what happens to water pressure? Tremendously increases, right? You got 60 miles of air on top of you. You can put that same amount of pressure with just 33 feet of water. There's a tremendous amount of pressure, and that these volcanoes that are trying to push their way up to the surface are under that tremendous amount of pressure. And once they get close enough to the surface where the pressure is not holding them back, and the pressure coming from underneath is greater than the pressure that's holding them down, they're going to come through that surface like a rocket. It's going to be like a nuclear weapon that went off, and it's going to create this massive explosion. And the reason that when they do appear, they're not this gentle, just sort of slowly coming up, is because they are under such tremendous pressure that is holding them back from growing. Here, this is what it looks like. They have some different stages that we go through here. And eventually, and then when they come up above the surface, they don't just stay there. They usually end up collapsing. And it's multiple times. And then finally, they're able to create a sustainable presence on the surface. They come up here to the surface, and then as they move away from this hot spot, they stop growing. They don't have any more magma and lava that are available to them. And then they start eroding. And they go through this erosion process. And tomorrow we're going to learn if there's coral present where these islands are growing. We're going to learn that that coral is going to grow around the fringe, and then that coral over centuries and millennia will just continue to grow and grow and grow, even though the original volcano lava material is completely gone. And this is how they grow. Eruption upon eruption, layer upon layer. And they grow slowly over time. And we can look once again at these islands. You've got the oldest, which is sitting here, 4 or 5 million years old, somewhere around there. And then you've got the newest, the Big Island of Hawaii. And you would expect the Big Island to be the Big Island, wouldn't you? Because it's brand new, it's continuing to grow. It's also as I said, the newest island, and not enough time has passed for erosion to take over. And you would expect that to be the biggest, and of course it is. There's Mauna Loa from Kona. Can't quite see it, but what I want you to notice is how gradual this slope is. And once again, it's like that because it hasn't eroded. There's Mauna Kea, and this is where those observatories are. That's above 14,000 feet, and you're looking at that from Hilo there as well. But just these gradual slopes. If you've seen other volcanoes, we're going to talk about them. Those are stratovolcanoes, and those are like Mount Rainier, Mount Baker, those mountains that just go straight up. Those are a different kind of volcano, as we're going to see here in a minute. Here's Ni'ihau. This is also what Kauai would look like, and you can see how deeply eroded this is. And once again, those are those islands from space. And as we said before, they're the most isolated islands. Now we're going to come back to volcanoes in a moment, but now we've got these islands. They're volcanic. We know how they form. The material that makes up the islands, but now it's like baking a cake, and the last thing you do is you put the frosting on, and that's the biology. This is the life. So how did all of this life, you're the most isolated chain of islands in the world, how is anything going to find you to begin populating that landmass? Well, the theme of both national parks in Hawaii is wind, waves, wings, and man. And this is how life ended up here. University offers this tropical island ecology and evolution class. And if you're an ecology scientist or an evolutionary scientist, you love coming to Hawaii because they're unique, as I said, in the sense that they're so isolated, and you really get to discover how these original life forms came here and how they evolved and how they changed the island. We look at the birds here, as well as all of the fauna. Originally, Hawaii had there's only one indigenous native palm. Everything else has been brought in. All of the eucalyptus tree, you're going to see some beautiful, beautiful trees that have these red flowers and these beautiful canopies. They are considered an invasive species. They're highly invasive here. If they could get rid of those beautiful trees, they would do it in a heartbeat, but they can't. And they come from Africa, and they were brought here. And there are so many species you can only imagine. Even the original Polynesians brought their own breadfruit. Breadfruit was not native. Taro was not native. None of those food crops that were here were native. They were all brought in by the original Polynesians. And almost every single thing that you are going to see growing here on this island has been brought in by people.
Oh, right.
Almost all of them. The vines, the plants, and so forth. Haleakala, however, there are a few species that are endemic and native here. We're going to go back to Haleakala, House of the Sun. And here's a really cool species the scientists have been studying. And this is called a silver sword. It's endemic. It's, as an example, it's endemic. It's only found here on the islands of Hawaii. It goes through, it lives for about 30 years. It's kind of like the yucca that we have in California. And it's going to grow, it's going to flower, and then it's going to die. These trees cannot, or these plants, silver sword, cannot live without the yellow-faced honeybee. And they have evolved together to be unique. The honeybee can't live without the silver sword, and the silver sword can't live without this yellow-faced honeybee. It is unique, and it is the pollinator for these plants. And they have evolved together, so this bee has specialized structures that allow it to get into the nectaries of these flowers and then pollinate these. They look like this. There are 28 species that are on the island. Also, because these islands are so tall, especially the big island of Hawaii, 14,000 feet, you have 8 of the 13 climate zones, microclimate zones. And these silver swords will grow at the very top at 10,000 feet on Haleakala, and then they'll grow down also at the very bottom as well. And they have evolved to take advantage of all these different and created adaptations to be able to survive in all these different microclimates that are there. Also, here's one we just got done talking about, the fruit fly. There are over 800 species of fruit flies. Now, most scientists right now believe that these fruit flies evolved from one species of fruit flies. Some of them even believe it was a female that was carrying eggs. But evolutionary, from a DNA perspective, they can trace them all the way back to just one ancestral fruit fly. And there are now over 800. And these fruit flies are really interesting. It's one of the favorite animals for scientists, geneticists especially, to study, because their DNA is fully mapped out, and we can look at all of these different changes pretty easily. Their DNA is pretty simple. And there are over 800 that are here on the island, and they've all found these little niches. So these animals will drift, plants will drift, and they'll populate this island, and there's a resource that they like. There's a little place, it's called a niche, where they fit in, and nobody else is using that niche. And so they just take advantage of it, and they take over that whole little ecosystem. And then it could be a micro ecosystem. It could be as big as 100 square feet, that kind of thing. Or it could be a fruit that comes in, and this fruit fly will specialize in that. So they have found 800 species. That means they found over 800 little niches, little places where they just thrive, and nobody else is using that. So it's really, really interesting. It's called adaptive radiation. The founder effect in ecology is probably the mechanism that was used for most of the life to come to this planet, or to these islands. And the founder effect is where there's some kind of event, sort of disaster in a way, that takes place. As an example, there ends up being a hurricane or a typhoon, and the wind picks up maybe these fruit flies, and these fruit flies get tossed around, or maybe seeds get tossed around in this storm, or birds get thrown off course. And maybe the bird has a piece of fruit attached to it, or maybe the bird has seeds, and this bird gets blown off course by these winds or this hurricane, and they land on the island, and then those seeds get scattered. This is how life originally got to these islands. Here are birds, this is extinct. You see those 2 yellow feathers on it? These feathers from the were used to create the capes of King Kamehameha the Great, and also the capes that he gave to Captain Cook. All the chiefs had cape. There were hundreds of these capes. So you can imagine the birds. The iiwi, these are descended from finches, and you can see all of these different beak shapes that have formed. Some of these are beak shapes, or so birds can get underneath bark, get to eat insects that are there. Some are for cracking nuts, some are for nectaries, reaching into the nectaries. All of these little adaptations were created from a single ancestor, and they just evolved to take advantage of these different niches, probing for insects, sipping nectar, or crushing seeds. Here's a bird. This is endemic, only found on the islands of Hawaii. You can look for these. These are nene. Talked a little bit about these yesterday or the day before. They evolved from the Canada goose. And now, how on earth did a Canada goose get on the islands of Hawaii? They had to have been blown in. They had to have been blown off course during their migration. But they ended up here. They found a home, and then they eventually evolved. The nene is essentially a flightless goose. There's also the pu'eo. This is a short-eared owl. How on earth did this bird end here? End up on the island.
Well,
2,500 miles away from the nearest. And it wasn't brought in by people. It ended up here. You also have a hawk that's here, an eo hawk that is endemic, found nowhere else in the world. There are some native mammals, the monk seal, hoary bat. There are no amphibians here on the island. There are a few fish and shrimp, and there are no snakes, which means you can go wander around and you don't have to worry about getting bit by a snake. There are no snakes. There's a little garden snake here. All right, back to volcanoes here a little bit. The volcanoes here in Hawaii are called shield volcanoes, as opposed to stratovolcanoes. Shield volcanoes are these gentle slopes. Stratovolcanoes are the ones that we see, like Mount St. Helens, if you remember that erupting. Those are the stratovolcanoes that erupt with just this violent force. They look like that. Mount St. Helens. Does anybody remember this? 1980? Yeah. Pretty amazing. We're still studying the effects of that. And then every now and then we'll have a volcanic eruption here in the middle of the Pacific. This is Vava'u out of Tonga. It was right there. Hunga Tonga as well. This is new land. This is how new land is created. Whoa. And as I said, there's this violent explosion. This was many times the power of a nuclear bomb going off. I think it was 1,000 times more powerful than Hiroshima. It was something just tremendous. And they come off like that, and then they form new islands. And they eventually end up looking like that. And you have new landmass. If it happens in your backyard, like Tonga, they now have a new island to add to the charts. And of course, you see that circle. What do you think the first thing that's going to grow on this island? It's going to be coconut.
Coconut?
Yep, that's a coconut that's ended up on the shore. And you have all of this debris that has ended up there that's coming from these other islands. And that'll eventually create soil. And you'll start to see new life. Birds will carry seeds. They'll end up on these islands. They'll carry seeds. Insects, maybe larvae in their gut, and that will all end up on these islands. And over hundreds, centuries, thousands of years, it'll bring new life. These volcanoes, they also can be so severe that they create their own weather patterns, disrupting air travel.
Oh.
I mean, that looks like an atomic bomb. That's a volcano going off. Now, shield volcanoes, unlike those stratovolcanoes, are very gentle in a sense in their eruptions. And you can see that photographer there. He's right next to that volcano that's erupting. You can actually get that close to the lava. With a stratovolcano, Mount St. Helens, that person would have been killed in that eruption. And here are school kids. I can remember visiting Hawaii in the 1980s. Kilauea was going off. We were at the national park, and that would have been me, standing right next to the lava. You could have been almost close enough to touch it, because it's not the same as a stratovolcano. This is lava that's just seeping out, and then it's taking the course of least resistance. There are two different kinds of lava that are here. One is a'a. Everybody try that. A'a, because you're going to see that. And the other is pahoehoe. Pahoehoe. Yeah, and can you see the difference? The a'a is really rough and grainy and gravelly, and the pahoehoe is more of that flowing, viscous kind of lava. What kind of lava is up on the left? Pahoehoe. And what about that one on the lower right? That's a'a. Good. What about that? Pahoehoe. Yeah. What about that? Pahoehoe. Pahoehoe. And you can see the difference, yeah. And underneath it, in the very foreground, that's pahoehoe. Yep. Now, sometimes also these lava tubes form as well. And on the island of Oahu, there are lava tubes as well. And on the big island of Hawaii, there are lava tubes. And these lava tubes can be, if you're ever in the national park, for instance, you can go through what's called Thurston lava tubes, and you can walk short distances. However, these lava tubes can extend for many, many miles, and people have followed them for miles into the island. And the ancient Hawaiians would use these lava tubes and so forth, and this would be one of the places where they would hide the bones of their elite and their kings and their chiefs that had passed away, and they would go deep into these lava tubes, and this is where they would hide those bones. And some of these you can walk through. They're really, really interesting. Also, sometimes this lava, because it can travel up to 30 miles an hour, sometimes it will catch trees in its path. And there's a state park that will show you these lava tubes that are just coming up, and these are trees. The lava went around it, the tree burned on the inside, and now you just have these columns of where trees used to be from the lava. Hawaii's lava is the hottest on the planet, up to 2,000 degrees, and it can travel up to speeds of 30 miles an hour. It gives off gases of nitrous oxide, sulfur dioxide, hydrogen sulfide, hydrochloric, all of these gases, nasty little gases that we don't really want to be near. Here, there are different kinds of explosions that take place, different kinds of haze. Back in LA, we used to call it smog. Sometimes we still have smog. But up here, these eruptions will take place. Kilauea is really the only active volcano here, but it'll every now and then it'll have a pretty, not violent, but a pretty severe eruption, and then it'll launch this laze or this fog into the air. And that will drift over to Maui, and that will affect people, and it will also affect people in certain communities on the island. I know people that have had to move from Maui because of this fog and this haze, and it reacts in their lungs, and they have trouble breathing, and it really can exasperate asthma. And there are signs around this when you're in that Volcano National Park, and they'll tell you there are places where the steam is coming out. It'll look like steam, like a good place to stop and have a facial, but it's not, because that steam is filled with these different gases, hydrochloric acid and so forth. Now, if we look at some of the eruptions that have taken place, going back over here to Kilauea, how many people have been here, by the way? Kilauea, okay. So Kilauea, it's had several different eruptions here, and what happens is the earth will tilt. They're constantly monitoring this to see, just to make sure that there's not a major eruption that's imminent, but there are these little fissures and so forth. It's not just simply the caldera, and these little areas here will release that pressure, and when it does, it's going to release that magma. And I thought I would pull this up. Hawaii earthquakes as of 4. I picked them up today, actually, and I'll give you what that looks like. Here's what's been going on today over there. They've been having earthquakes probably about every 20 minutes. There's an earthquake taking place. They're measuring this. And if you look at that on the Big Island of Hawaii, there are no earthquakes that are taking any place else in the chain. It's only where this volcano is active. And I just put this in there as well. On that left-hand side, you can see as of about 3 or 4 hours ago, there have been 23 earthquakes, 7 days, 123. If you look at them over the past year, there have been almost 11,000 earthquakes that have been measured. And these are earthquakes that are in the 2, 3, 4 range here. So that volcano is going. If you ever do go there, this is what it looks like. They've closed off this road. You're going to be able to walk. They've got some facilities there, and you'll walk maybe half a mile, and you can go in, and they'll have signs there, and they'll have a crowd gathered. You can walk right up to the edge of the caldera, and you can look down, and that's what you'll see if it's active. You'll see lava that'll be coming out. If you come back here to Hawaii, and you have a little bit of time, on the Big Island, you can go out there and see that. And that picture was taken, I think, a month ago.
Oh.
That's what that was looking like.
That's cool.
There. Some other eruptions that have taken place. That's the caldera. You can see that little road. You drive out there to the visitor center, and then you can explore this little area. These two towns, this is what it looks like when these eruptions come through. There is no way to stop this lava. You can build concrete walls. I mean, it's 2,000 degrees, and it will melt concrete. It will melt anything that you put in its path, and it can move up to 30 miles an hour if it's really flowing. This is one of the eruptions. You can see that fountain. It's going to take the course of least resistance. Was anybody on a cruise during that time? 2017, 2018? No. When the cruise ship actually took a detour and went all the way around the island so the guests could see this as it was coming out to the ocean. And this was one of the longest. You can see this, right? This is before, and that's after. And it took out that entire village that was right there, and it created brand new land. Comes out, it's explosive when it hits the water. These people are probably way too close.
Isn't that cool?
They're on their honeymoon, enjoying the scene. This is a helicopter. Probably too close too. You just don't know what's going to happen here. But it created 760 new acres of land as it cooled, and it filled in that entire bay. No way to stop it at all. And if you look further up on the screen, you can see other places where it came out. And there you go. If you want some oceanfront territory. Now, here's what happens. When that lava, if you own that, let's say you own that coastal property, and this lava comes and it adds another half mile of lava right in front of your coastal home. Do you own that half mile?
Yeah.
You do not. And it feels like you should, doesn't it? But you do not. Who owns it? It's the state. The state owns all of that new land. And now, where you were sitting there on the coast, now you're half a mile away from the coast. What just happened to the value of your property? Yeah, I think you'll get preference in terms of being able to buy it, but it certainly does not seem fair at all. Now somebody can put a house right in front of where your house used to be, right? But people do, and they buy this, and they will put a house on stilts right on the lava. And there you go. There's no electricity. There is no water. There is no sewage. There is no city hookup. You are self-contained while you're out there. But there you go.
Beautiful.
It's very quiet because nobody else will buy anything around you. You are the only one. And people do it. And there are some homes right there. And you can even see another one back there. And they're just all self-contained. And you just bring a truck in and you got your water, go on solar, go off the grid, and there you go. Volcanoes produce new earth. Lava erupting from a volcano is seen as a source of life rather than destruction, unless it was your house that got burned down. Right? Yeah. Might not see it that way. After a volcanic eruption, the ohia tree and the lehua flower signals the completion of the life cycle here, and illuminates a new beginning. And you will see this tree with these flowers, these bright red flowers, and there's a legend about it, and I thought I would tell you this, so that when you do see the ohia tree, you will know the story of it. One day Pele met a handsome warrior named Ohia, and she asked him to marry her. Ohia, however, already had a love, Lehua. Pele was so furious that she turned him into a tree, the ohia tree. Lehua was heartbroken, of course, and the gods took pity on her and decided that it was unjust to have her separated from her true love, Ohia. Thus, they turned Lehua into a flower on the ohia tree, so that the two lovers would be forever joined together. And Hawaiian folklore says that if you pick that lehua flower from the tree, that it's going to rain the next day, because she's crying. What a story. All right, folks, that's all I've got for you. Thanks for coming. Tomorrow, we've got a live show in Honolulu. And I'll hang out here to answer any questions you may have.